So the season finale for Ahsoka just dropped. We see Baylan on top of this statue of the father, and we saw the father in the Clone Wars in the arc where Anakin is fulfilling his chosen one destiny, kind of. Of course, he gets his mind wiped at the end of the arc so that there's no interference in the Revenge of the Sith. But the living embodiments of the Force, the father, the son, and the daughter are of course still canon. So one of the coolest things about these three characters specifically is that they used to be considered legends before they were brought back into canon in Clone Wars. But there is another specific character that was tied to those characters in a very, very dark, twisted way. For anyone who doesn't know who Abeloth is, she used to be a mortal woman some odd 100,000 years ago before the Battle of Yavin, who charmed her way into this very powerful Force-sensitive family. And they're said to be the living embodiment of the Force, working under them as their servant, and then eventually being recognized as the mother of the son and the daughter. The story only becomes dark and twisted once Abeloth realizes that her children do not age, and she does because she is mortal. So she decides to take matters into her own hands and drink and bathe in the fountains, or rather waters of some sort of power and knowledge. And instead of giving her some kind of angelic glow or powers, these waters instead end up deforming her, turning her into a monster and corrupting her mind to the point where she is the embodiment of chaos and unbalance. So for tens of thousands of years, the son and the daughter will have to keep on coming back to Abeloth's prison to make sure she never escapes and the universe can stay in balance, because if it doesn't, then that's bad for everyone. What are the implications of that? Well, that's left up for interpretation and theorizing. I just wanted to make this video to explain how Abeloth can kind of be introduced back into canon, or rather into canon for the first time. So I'm just going to kind of run down all the context clues I gathered from watching Ahsoka and also the Clone Wars arc that involved Mortis and the Chosen One Destiny. First one being, when Baylan is on top of the father statue, it zooms out and you can see that there's the father and the son, but the daughter statue is defaced. In Legends, it's said that the family used to live on a jungle planet when things used to really be in balance, but from what we see in Ahsoka, this planet was kind of overtaken by dark side users, which would explain the lack of trees. Also, the protruding statues in the random spots. They probably had a bunch of trees surrounding them at a certain point, but it attributes to a very heavy dark presence on the planet. Why wouldn't the father's statue be defaced? Well, I think it's because his statue is very important, because when the camera switches to the backside of Baylan to show his perspective and where he's looking, he sees a monastery. The father statue is pointing towards a monastery. And for people who haven't watched Clone Wars, or specifically the Mortis arc on Clone Wars, monasteries placed on the planet Mortis was a huge indicator to show it was one of the family members of this very powerful Force family. The father has his own monastery, the son has his own monastery. You don't see the daughter's monastery, but it's implied that all three of them have their own. So whatever Baylan's looking at in the final episode of Ahsoka, it could be the monastery of another family member yet to be introduced into canon. Now, the only way that Abeloth would stay in her prison was if the son and the daughter would come and keep her there every so often. But now that they're dead, it is more likely for someone like Baylan Skoll to spring her free. Now, I don't know if Abeloth is at that monastery or if she's being kept prisoner. I can only speculate, but if you pay attention to earlier in the season of Ahsoka, Baylan says that he's being called. And this little tidbit reminds me of the time in The Vampire Diaries, if you ever watched that show, where this character Silas was introduced. He was entombed because his powers were way too righteous, way too out of control, very psychedelic. And the way that he got free was by tricking people, by showing them visions of false things, effectively luring them to his tomb to free him. Anyone can tell that Baylan Skoll is a very charismatic character, but that doesn't necessarily translate as a very intelligent character. His intelligence speaks volumes, of course, but he is, at the end of the day, just a normal guy. I guess he's force sensitive, but look, he doesn't know everything. And it is likely that he is being tricked by something that's more powerful than himself. He even admitted that the thing that he's searching for is more powerful than himself. He is simply hoping that it will help him on his quest to bring balance to the universe. And now that Ahsoka has wrapped up, and now that there's no speculation left for whether we're trying to determine if the father, the son, and the daughter are connected to this planet somehow, now it's clear as day for us to see that they were connected to this planet. My theory is they lived on this planet. This was actually the forest jungle planet that they lived on with Abeloth. And when she ended up becoming crazy and chaotic, they ended up imprisoning her on that planet and then jumping to another galaxy. If you notice in the Mortis Clone Wars arc, the father seems very remorseful for his children. He's actually saddened that his kids will never live a normal life. But if they're the actualization of the Force, the manifestation of the Force, why would such things bother beings like this? Why, when the son does very maniacal things, the father and the daughter excuse it with, well, it's just his nature. He has no control over it. I can totally understand that from a certain point of view, but I think it goes deeper than that. I think the mother had lasting impacts on the son and the daughter. And I think the way that they operate when we see them in the Clone Wars is a direct effect of that relationship they kind of had with her. It would explain why the son feels like he has no control over his emotions, over his destructive tendencies, and why the daughter feels overly responsible to pick up the slack where her father can't anymore because he's dying of old age. When someone tries to touch her, she will literally jump and say it's forbidden. I think that goes back to when Abeloth was immortal, and maybe it was a rule before, but they just oversaw it because she was such a nice, kind being that infiltrated their family and became that mother character. But once she became corrupted, it had a very traumatic effect on the entire family, maybe even the father. So what her motivations could be if she was freed from her tomb, I'm not really sure, because if she's supposed to be the embodiment of chaos, it could just be that she simply just wants to go on a slaughter spree. I don't know, but that's not really a good story. So I'm hoping it's a much more intimate story, because if you remember, Ahsoka is imbued with the essence of the daughter. Ahsoka died on Mortis and was revived by using the life essence of the daughter. So if Baylan frees Abeloth and Abeloth comes into an altercation with Ahsoka and then recognizes that essence, this could become a much more intimate story than just trying to stop another fascist from taking over, which is something I'm very excited about. I think that's when Star Wars is very peak. I love political Star Wars, but it is often overlooked and misinterpreted by a lot of the fan base. And for those who are concerned about the lack of catering towards the casual fans of Star Wars, I personally am not concerned by that. I put a lot of work into being a Star Wars fan, and I know how silly that sounds, but for someone who hyperfixates on something, hopefully you can understand too that this feels more like a reward than it does a challenge or a homework assignment. I'm trying to find a way to not sound like a complete asshole, but I am very over the narrative that we need to cater to the most casual fans. when it is not the casual fans who are upholding the fandom. Again, that is just my opinion. If anyone has any other opinion on that, I would like to hear your side about it. This is something I don't feel like there's a right or wrong answer about, but honestly, I'm tired of being held back by a bunch of people who don't put any work or effort into understanding the universe and just expecting everything to be spoon-fed to them. When there is a plethora of context clues and content that you can sort through to come to the conclusion that Star Wars is badass. And it's definitely worth the effort to try to understand what's going on.